All right. Cool. So, any questions? All right. Do you have one? Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a question about the PA3.
Okay.
So it said if we don't have 20Q, the text fail.
If you don't have 20Q,
Yeah, so we need to create a new one, right? Create a 20Q.
so when you run the program, you can always assume 20q.txt exists.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and if I run your program and I put in the name of a database in the command line, you can assume that that also exists.
Okay. Okay.
And you can just assume it's a valid file. I won't try to test it with a file that's corrupt.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't exist, just exit. Don't worry about what happens. All right, any other questions? All right, so a couple of things I want to do. So I want to make this little window go away on the side, and I don't see how to do that. I won't worry about it. All right, so let's talk a little more about the midterm. So midterm exam, right, tomorrow at this time, so don't miss it. If you're attending class at this time, you need to take the midterm at this. Well, if you're registered for this section on Canvas, you need to take this section of the midterm. If you're registered for the morning section, you have to take the morning one because the other one won't show up for you. So show up for the proper midterm. And I made an announcement about this. So you can read this in detail, but basically what it says is the exam is open note, open book, okay, but I don't want you to use any other resources. In particular, don't surf the web. Obviously, don't talk to other people, or ask friends and stuff like that. But you can use your notes. You can use the text, although the text is huge, right? And what constitutes your notes, I'm not too worried about it, okay? Be reasonable. If you cannot remember any of the methods in the string class and you want to, take a page from the Java documentation and put that in your notes, fine, go ahead and do that. You don't have to write it out by hand, right, or copy it. But I don't want you to be just sort of blatantly surfing the web during the exam, okay? So try to get together, in a file or in a document or on paper or something, the set of notes that you want to use for this. But try to do it in a way so that you don't spend the whole exam flipping through your notes trying to find stuff, okay? Most of the stuff I'm going to test you on you should already know because you've been doing it again and again and again. How many times have you written public static void main? How many times have you done string.length or string.equals, right? So use your notes for the things that you can't quite remember. Is it public static void, or is it public void static, or is it void public static, or things like that. I can never remember how those angle brackets go when you make a linked list to say is it integers or strings, right? So put those things in your notes, and trust your memory, right, for the bulk of it, because it should be stuff that you've been doing a lot of. I strongly recommend, so the quiz is going to be on Canvas, right? It'll show up as a Canvas quiz. I strongly recommend not just typing your answers directly into Canvas, okay? Maybe you have better luck with Canvas than I do, but I lose a lot of work when I do things in Canvas. I type comments into students, and halfway through my typing, something glitches and it goes back to the previous student. When I go forward, my comments are gone and I have to start over again. Okay, so anytime I have to use Canvas, here's what I do, right? I make a document. I might do it in VI, I might do it in Notepad or Mousepad or something else, but I do all my typing in there. And then I go to Canvas and I just copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. And you know, if I paste something and something goes wacky and I lose the page, I just go back and I paste it again, right? So you've been using Canvas the whole time you're at Clark, probably. You've got your own experience with it. If it works great for you and you want to trust it, that's fine with me. But I recommend, you know, answering these questions in an editor, okay? VI will work great. You know, Notepad++, plain old Notepad, Mousepad, Kate, whatever your, you know, gedit, whatever you like using is fine. But I'm going to ask you not to use an editor that does, you know, code completion or, you know, intense syntax checking or things like that. In other words, an editor that's going to do part of your exam for you, don't use that, okay? But something to let you type code and you know, indent and that kind of stuff, and then copy and paste into Canvas, that's probably a good way to go. And you know, you do one question, you write up your answer, you copy and paste it. Don't delete it, okay? Keep it around. Just move down in your file or make a new file or something. Come at this with the mindset of what happens if Canvas like blows up, you know? What if I've got 5 minutes left and I'm typing in my last answer and something happens and I get logged out of Canvas, you know? Can I go back and just recopy and paste from my document, or do I have to type all this stuff in again? Okay, so prepare for disaster. Don't worry about it, but be prepared for it, because you know, seriously, I've lost a lot of time through these kinds of things. I'm happily typing away and putting in grades, and all of a sudden Canvas like logs me out, you know, and the last 5 things I did have to get done again. And if I didn't write down what the grades were that I was putting in, I've got to go back and I've got to regrade, you know. So just keep that in mind, okay? Practical matters. Let's look at this very low-key practice quiz that I put together, okay? This is not graded. This is purely for practicing copy and paste. So, which sounds silly, but practice midterm. So let me do this as a student. And I will take the quiz. It says 2 points, but it's not graded. It's 2 points of nothing. So this is a sample question. Write some Java code to say, hello, practice copying and pasting from your favorite non-code completing editor, etc., etc. Okay, so let me play with VI. Alright, so there's some code that's indented, right? And you know, I've typed up my answer to my question and I want to paste it into Canvas for question 1. Okay, so you can do edit copy. On my setup, highlighting text automatically copies it. Okay, so that's a nice shortcut. If I paste this, you know, it pastes, but it doesn't look exactly like what I had. I got 2 levels of indent instead of 3. Well, that's not horrible, you know, but that's a possibility. So Control-Shift-V for me will do a paste formatted, which actually makes everything flush on the left. Sorry, paste unformatted, which makes everything flush on the left, which is not terribly great. But this paragraph option up here, right, if I change that to say pre-formatted, and then I paste, it indents faithfully, but it also throws extra space in between each of the lines. Okay, not the end of the world, but not exactly what I wanted. If I paste unformatted with the pre-formatted tag, now I get exactly what I originally started with, right? Okay, so I'm not taking off points for style on the exam. But when you're putting stuff into your exam and you're going to look at it to see if it's correct or not, it's a whole lot easier if it's indented properly. Okay? It's a whole lot easier if it's single spaced instead of double or triple spaced. And when I'm trying to grade it, right, if everything is flush left and has lots of space between it and I have to scroll around a lot, and it doesn't look right, it may be harder for me to figure out what you did, you know, if you did something kind of unusual. So I don't want you to spend time during the exam messing around with formatting. So what I'm suggesting is before you get to the exam, do something like this, right? Play around with whatever editor you're going to use. If you're going to use Notepad, play around with Notepad. If you're going to use VI, and so on. And figure out how to do this. How do I copy from my editor and paste it in a way that makes it look like what I started with? And if I actually use tabs, right? So these actually have tabs inside them. Well, they did. Okay, so those actually have tabs. Tabs should work as well, so I'll copy that. I'll delete all of this stuff. If I just paste it and it's got tabs, that seems to paste it faithfully. Okay, and it turns them into spaces in here, that's fine. If I say pre-formatted and I paste it with tabs, I get the double spacing. If I say paste unformatted, that seems to come out faithful. So figure this out ahead of time. Don't be spending time tomorrow during the exam trying to figure out how to paste your answers in. And you know, if you don't get this figured out and all your stuff comes out flush text, I'll work with it anyway, okay? But this is a good thing to figure out regardless, so you may as well figure it out today, if possible. And if you're using VI, I gave you some hints here. If you say :set expand tab, VI will :set expand tab, and I can say hello, hello, and I can hit a tab. This is indented. More tabs here, fewer, and none, right? And these are actually spaces in here. Okay, so :expand tab says replace my tab character with a bunch of spaces, right? And they still act like tabs. Right, they move you over to a multiple of 8 for the column position, but they end up just being spaces, and that can be nicer, especially if you use an unusual tab setting, like if you set tab stops to 2 or 4 or 3. It may look nice inside VI, but it's actually, you know, weirdly tabbed. So turning your tabs into spaces factors that out. If you used, you know, some kind of Notepad type thing, like that, you'll have a different experience. So if you just paste this, it comes out flush on the left. If you unformat it, paste it, it comes out flush on the left. If you set to pre-formatted and you paste it, it comes out looking good. And if you set it to pre-formatted and you paste unformatted, it also comes out looking good. So play around with that. All right, the other kind of thing you have to do is and I can't make this box go away, so if you talk, it's going to show your name up here. So if you don't want your name, send me a chat message and I'll turn off the recorder while you're talking. So the other thing you're going to see is you're going to see some questions where it says write some code to, you know, simulate the universe. And then you'll see some questions that say, you know, take this code and make some changes to it. Okay? So what do we do there? Well, we'll copy the code, right? And then go into your favorite editor and paste it. Okay? So in Kate, if I just pasted with a Control V, right, it seems to paste it. I've got these little symbols here, which I think are tabs. So I'll say, here's my change. I'll copy all of this. I'll come in here. I'll say pre-formatted, and I'll paste. And it's still nicely formatted. There's my change that I made, and so on. Okay. If I don't do that, if I just leave this at paragraph and I paste, it's all slammed against the left, and it's a little harder to work with. So this is probably your best friend, is just, you know, setting the pre-formatted option. And that makes it stay nice and clean. Alright, how did I do on my quiz? Yep, I got that answer right. There's my universe simulator, and yep, I changed the code. Good, I got 100. Alright, so does that make sense? It's just one of these things, and whatever school you're at, whatever learning management system they use, this is always different, it seems. Canvas, that pre-formatted option seems to take away most of the heartache. So that's up there if you want to mess with it. How's my upload doing? Still uploading. All right. Any questions, worries, concerns about the midterm? So there's this list of possible midterm topics. That's just kind of boilerplate stuff. Make sure you're comfortable with the idea of classes and objects, how to define a class, fields, methods, public, private, and making accessors and mutators, setters and getters. Be prepared to write code, analyze code, and or modify code. Be comfortable with implementing linked lists. Okay, so you're doing this for, well, we've done this in class, right? You've used the linked list class, but we've also talked about how to implement this ourselves, and we've done that, you know, for particular types of objects and for generics. So you've got a few examples of it. So, you know, defining a node class and having a header that, you know, represents the list, and if we don't have a sentinel, that header is null. If we have a sentinel, the header is, you know, the sentinel node. Moving through the list, adding nodes, deleting, searching, all that kind of stuff, right? So all the 222 stuff we did with lists applied to an object-oriented domain, Java in particular. Know how to use the scanner class, reading from system in, reading from a file by saying new file, constructed with a file name, and then the basic methods, next, next line, next int, and so on, along with the corresponding has next line, has next int methods. Putting those in loops and such. Definitely be familiar with the string class. Okay, the things that we do with string: length to find the length of a string, character @ to get the nth character, uppercase, lowercase to get those versions of it. Substring we didn't really do anything with, but substring gives you a piece of a string. Comparing two strings, seeing if two strings are equal, and so on. The toString method we've talked about a lot. You've written some of these, you've used some of these. It's a thing that's used when someone tries to turn an object into a string, typically to concatenate it to another string while we're printing it, but it could be anything. And so toString is a public string method, takes no arguments. And you can always write a toString method for your class, and that's what your objects will get turned into. Okay, constructors are the things that, you know, you call when you want to make an object of your given class. Signature of a method is a combination of the name of the method and the types of parameters it takes, right? And so you can have two methods with the same name, but they take different types of parameter lists. They're separate methods, they're distinct, okay? And you tell one from the other by its signature, which is the name plus the types of arguments. Try-catch blocks we worked with a bunch. Arrays we haven't really dealt with a whole lot, other than, you know, the string bracket args, but basically you can say array name dot length to find the length of an array. Don't worry about using the new keyword to declare arrays, and don't worry about arrays of objects because we haven't talked about them. Do we need to comment our code? Well, that's a good question. If your code is perfect and well organized, and I can easily tell that it works great, then comments are unnecessary. If your code works great but has a few problems, but I can still tell what's going on because it's super well organized, comments aren't necessary. But if your code is kind of chaotic and doesn't work, but you think you were pretty close, it's probably worth putting comments in to say, you know, here I'm moving down the list looking for the magic node, right? And then a comment that says, I found the magic node, so now I'm inserting something before that. And then I can tell, you know, you had the right algorithm, but, you know, you were making this one mistake over and over and over again. So you would lose a few points for that. Whereas if it's not an algorithm that looks at all like what it should and there's no comments, I may not know, you know, that there's partial credit in there. And again, you know, you're typing this stuff up, right? Which is probably faster than writing it by hand for a lot of us. And so yeah, hopefully there's time to like at least put, you know, a couple of words on the tricky sections of code. But no, I'm not strictly counting comments for points. It's a really good question, though. All right, we talked about static or class methods versus instance methods, non-static methods, and fields. Okay, so you should be familiar with the basics of those. I'm not going to go really deep into that, but the main thing we use static for is, you know, public static void main. I'm not going to worry about the this keyword since we only talked about that once. But we did talk about class extensions and using the super keywords, so I'm not going to go deep onto that either. And I'm not going to ask you about any of the window graphic swing stuff that we're doing yesterday and today and in the coming days. So that's know about the linked list class, know about the hash map class. Basically anything we've been doing in our programming assignments, anything we've done more than a casual passover in classroom discussion is good material for the exam. Uh-oh. Someone yelling at their skateboard. All right, other questions? If I run out of time, Canvas will save my work. I do not know. So I've set the exam to actually close at like 2:57. Okay, so it's a 50-minute exam. I want you to think of it as 50 minutes, and I'm giving you 5 minutes grace. It's not officially due until 2:55. But I would plan on finishing it in 15 minutes, and then if you know, are running into a problem, it won't submit or something, you've got a few minutes to deal with that. And the exam actually will close at 2:57. So there's a bit of wiggle room there at the end in case something goes wrong. I will be on Zoom throughout the exam. I recommend people log into Zoom. I'll try to remember to keep my mic muted. I'll have chat disabled between students, but you'll be able to chat with me. So if something's coming up, you know, or obviously if there's a question like, you know, what does this mean? You can go ahead and chat with me through Zoom, or, you know, audio chat, one-on-one. And again, hopefully you're putting the stuff into some kind of document, okay? This is not something I want to say out loud, so forget it after I say it. But, you know, absolute worst case, if something goes wrong, if you cannot get your stuff loaded into Canvas and so on, right, I would probably say, okay, just take the document that you've done all of your writing in and send that to me through an email, right? And I would work with that. But you know, let that be a comfort to you that there is a safety net there, but then forget about it, because if 40 people send me, you know, 40 different versions of documents, it's going to take me the rest of my life to grade. So I don't want to go that route, right? But if something's going on, Canvas is letting me out, you know, my password isn't working anymore, something like that, right? Just talk to me on Zoom and we'll figure out a solution, okay? And this is still, you know, an experimental thing, so we'll figure out how to make things work. All right, other questions? All right, well, let's play with Eclipse. All right, so I started playing with Eclipse this morning in the first section, and I managed to get Eclipse to segfault about 7 or 8 times before class ended, and kind of took us all out of our misery. So I did some experimenting between then and now, and I think an earlier version of this is going to be more stable. Now, it may just be my Linux experience. It may be that on Windows, downloading the latest version works great. So let me show you some options here. Okay, go to Eclipse Download, and I'll say Download Packages. And it may be if you download IDE for Java developers, that's version 2020-03, it may be it works great for you. Okay, under Windows, under Mac, maybe even under Linux. For me, under Linux, it keeps segfaulting. Okay, and I can force it to segfault. I know sequences of things that make that happen. So I can get to an older version that seems to be stable for me. So let me offer you downloading Eclipse Photon. Okay, I tried all of these. They crash. They crash. They crash. Photon seems stable. So I'm going to click on Eclipse Photon. This is version 4.8. I'm going to do Eclipse IDE for Java developers, not for EE developers. Okay, that's the Enterprise Edition. But this one down here, I'm going to do 64-bit. Okay, so so I've done that, and I got this right here. Eclipse Java Photon R Linux GTK x86-64. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unpack this one, and we're going to use this, and we're going to see if we can make it crash. Now it still has some quirks, and I don't have an explanation for those, but we can work around those quirks. But the crashing every few minutes is really annoying. So I'm going to extract from this, from Photon. And it's going to make an Eclipse directory, and I'll make a work directory under here, and I'm just going to go ahead and run this executable file Eclipse. And so it's a different splash screen. That's okay. And for my workspace, I'm just going to go with downloads Eclipse, and I'll just go with work. And again, I'm going to check this box which says use this as the default and do not ask again. I'm going to pause my share for a moment. Go back to recording. I have no idea what Photon is doing. It's like hanging out on the splash screen. There we go. All right, so we've got Eclipse running. So I'm going to close out these things, and we're going to install that extra software. So we're going to go under Help. We're going to say Install New Software. Under Work With, I'm going to click that down arrow, and I'm just going to say Photon. And then type text. I'm going to type Swing, S-W-I-N-G, and I'll just click General Purpose Tools, which gets me Swing Designer and the documentation. I'll say Next. I'll say Next once more. I'll accept the license and say Finish. And then we'll wait for it to upload, and it'll take a minute. All right, then it'll want to restart Eclipse. And we should be good to go. So let's make a project. So we'll make a new Java project. We'll call this G2 for GUI 2. I'll talk about this when we get to PA4, but I'm going to ask you to work with Java Standard Edition 1.8. Okay, there's newer versions all the way up to 1.14, but I'd like you to work with 1.8. It's a very stable edition. It's still available, it's long-term supported, and it works well. Alright, so let's make a Java class. So we'll say File New, and I'm going to say Other, and I'll come down to Windowbuilder and expand that. I'll come down to Swing Designer and expand that, and then I'll say JFrame. And I'll just call this Main Window, and I'll say Finish. So we started doing this yesterday, okay? So what has it done? It's created this bunch of code. It creates a definition for a class called main window that extends a JFrame. It's got a bunch of imports, so I can click this plus sign to expand, and I can see there's multiple imports here, okay, including the import for the JFrame. So we can collapse that code. And here's my main method, public static void main. And there's stuff going on in here, okay? This is stuff we'll get into in a few weeks. This is called threaded programming. This is actually creating a separate thread, a separate process in the virtual machine that will run this code. And what that thread does is basically creates a new instance of this main window called frame, and then it sets it to visible. And that's all this main method does. It actually exits right after that. But because it's constructed a main window, which is an extension of a JFrame, my process, my whole execution does not terminate. I have a separate thread running which is managing this window. Okay, so what happens when I construct my main window? This is the stuff we were doing when we played with GUIs a few days ago. We set the default close operation to be exit on close. We set the location 100, 100, and the dimensions of the frame. We create a JPanel. We set the border of the JPanel. We set something called the layout manager. And then we add that JPanel to the JFrame by saying set content pane. And so all of this, if I hit the run button, punchline is it gives me a frame. And I can resize it, and I can move it around, and I can exit, and that makes it close. Alright, so there's this design tab, and if I click on the design tab, I get a visual representation of my frame. And you know, when I run my project, that frame that I see, that's what this is. Okay, now it's a different appearance. The buttons look different. The upper left corner looks different. But it's the same dimensions, it's the same location, right? And so if I were to take this frame and make it larger and then run my project, and I'll say yes, always save my changes, I get a bigger frame. And how big is it? It's the same size as what I did in my design window. Okay, how did that happen? Because when I change the size of this frame, if I look at my source, this set bounds call changed. Right, it used to be 100, 100, 682, 513. If I make this really small, like 123 by 107, my source code now says 100, 100, 123, 107. So I'm writing, or I'm having this tool write Java code for me by moving things around here. Okay, so that's kind of cool. All right, all of these objects, so what do I have over here? I have a frame, which is this whole thing. You can see this little border appears around it. If I click on this that says content pane, I get a little border right here. Okay. So all of these things have properties that we can manipulate. For example, there's a background property on this content pane. Right now it's set to 238, 238, 238. Those are red, green, blue intensities. This is an annoying pop-up. These are red, green, blue intensities from 0 to 255. So it's a shade of white, right? It's you know, most of the way to being 255, 255, 255. If I click on the little dot dot dot, right, I can set this color from a palette, right? So I could make it pink, for example. And now the background of my panel is pink. And if I run it, you know, I've got this wonderful salmon color here. We'll run with salmon for now. All right. So there's properties we can set. And on this properties window, you can click this button here to show advanced properties, and there's other things you can set. For example, I can set a border. So we're looking at this J panel inside here, and the border is set to empty border. But I could set it to, you know, a compound border, and that's not going to make a big difference. I wonder if I can find an interesting border. How about a bevel border? I think that changed it a little bit. So if I run it, I get a little bit more of a recessed look over here. Okay, you can spend a lot of time playing with these things, but what's happening every time I do this, my source code is being updated. For example, it said content pane dot set background color dot pink. Content pane set border new bevel border lowered null 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 null, right? So we can write this code by hand, and we did a bit of that a few days ago, but we can also have it written for us by doing this drag and drop. Alright, so that's one thing. Let me do a bit of a diversion here. Hold on a second. Worked or not. There's a weird bug that was popping up in Windowbuilder earlier, and got an inkling how to fix it. So we'll see if this works. All right, so we can drop components in here also. So for example, I can click on J button, come in here, and I can click anywhere that I want and pop my button down. So say I want a button right here. Well, when I do that, right, I get this huge button, right? And I can run this, and you know, my whole window is a button. And if I make my window bigger, my button gets really big. Okay, that's a little weird, but it's actually considered a feature. I could take a second button and I can drop it in here, and it goes up on the top. And now when I run my thing, I have, you know, a big button that's taking up most of my window, and I have a little button up here on the top. Alright, this is considered a feature by most people. To me, this is really kind of counterintuitive, okay? This is what's called a layout manager. And every tool that you use that lets you graphically design these, you know, Android Studio, which is IntelliJ, Eclipse, NetBeans, all this stuff, there's this thing that's controlling where your components are placed, okay? And to me, if I want to put a button right here, I'd like to be able to just drop a button right here. So there's a way you can do that. Go over here under Layouts and click Absolute Layout. And come in here, and when you put your mouse in here, you'll see a plus sign next to your mouse, and you'll see a green border around here. Just click that. And now, if I click over here on Content Pane, it tells me the layout is absolute. Okay? There's all these options. We're doing an absolute layout. Absolute layout means I can take a button and drop it right here. There's my button. I can take a text field and drop it right there. I can take another text field and drop it right there. I can take another J button. I'm getting some lag here because it's Eclipse, I guess. I can take another button and drop it here, right? And when you drop these buttons, you know, you can type in what you want the button to say and so on. And so I'm just dragging and dropping these things, and if I don't want my text field to be here, I want it to be somewhere else, I can just drag it over, right? And there's some help for aligning these things. So I can bring this down and align it vertically with that button, and so on. And all of this, again, it's just modifying your source code. So if you go back to your source window, all of this extra stuff has been added, okay? We constructed a J button called button new button with a string to the constructor that says new button, and so on and so forth. Wow, time has flown. It's almost time up. Okay, let me tie some actions into these. So new button, let me double click on that. And by double clicking on it, it takes me into a new section of code, and it creates this action listener that we used the other day. Okay, and it's creating this in what we call an inner class. All of this is an argument to the add action listener method. Okay, so we create a J button, and then we call its add action listener method, and the argument to that is basically the construction of a new action listener that contains this method called action performed. And so in here I can say something like system.out.println and ignore that. And I'll say click. And let's go ahead and run this, and every time that I press new button, my console says click. Okay, this one I didn't tie anything into, so it doesn't do anything. And in my action performed method, I get an argument arg0. Let's take a look at arg0. So we'll just concatenate that to the word click. And now when I click my button, I can see, you know, action performed, new button, modifiers button 1. If I hold down control and click, it says modifiers control plus button 1. If I hold down shift and I click, it says shift plus button 1. If I hold control and shift, it says control plus shift plus button 1. Alright, I can come into this text field and I can right click and I can say add an event handler. Let's add an event handler for a key. Let's add something when a key is pressed. Right, so I do that and it brings me into a new section of code. It's added a key listener and it's created a method called key pressed, and I can put a message in here. And I'll just say, you know, key has been pressed, arg0 equals, and let's print this argument that was passed to the key listener. So we'll run this. I forget which box I did. I think it was this one. So I'll put my cursor in there and I'll hit the letter A, and it tells me key pressed. arg0 equals all of this stuff. Key code 65, that's the ASCII code for an A. Key text is A, that's the name of the button. Key character equals lowercase a. I can hit a B and it tells me ASCII code 66, character is B. If I hit my left shift button, it tells me code equals 16. Well, that's not an ASCII code, it's an internal code. Key text equals shift. Does not have a key character. Key location equals left. If I hit my right shift button, I get almost the same line, but key location equals right. I can hit control, I can hit alt, I can hit the meta key. Right? Key text equals Windows. And there's you know, tons of information available in this arg0. That's interesting. Right? So and if I hit the enter key, right, I get key code 10, key text equals enter, key character equals enter lowercase, and so on. So this is super low level interaction, right? I can pick up individual keystrokes, not just the letter that somebody typed, not just when they hit the enter key. but anytime you touch anything on your keyboard, right, except maybe the function key, but anything else on your keyboard, right, generates a key pressed event. And my arrow key generates a few key pressed events. But no, it's generating a 40 or a 38. So there's a down, there's an up, there's a right, there's a left. All right. So basically we're going to design graphical elements. We're going to drag and drop widgets into here. And then we can set up actions by right-clicking, going down to Add Event Handler, and we can add all these different types of events. So we'll look at more of this on Monday, okay? Tomorrow's exam. Monday we'll go over the exam, and then we'll come back to this, and we'll start looking at different types of events that we can add, different things that we can do with components, properties we can control, and so on and so forth. And we'll have a lot of fun with that. So I think Photon is being more stable than 2020, so I recommend downloading that if you're getting crashes. All right, have a good rest of your day. I will see you tomorrow.